Random Thoughts. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Nandi Republic and I'm going to describe its structure in detail. Now, if you've watched my videos, you know that I'm very huge into talking about African republics. And that is because the way African history is told, for some reason, African republics are not talked about enough. And that is despite the fact that republics are actually a superior form of government to monarchy. And if you talk to many Africans, they know a lot about African monarchies. They know of Buganda, they know of Mali, they know of old Ghana, they know of all these other commonwealths that were monarchs. But if you ask them about African republics, very few people even know that there were republics in Africa, actually. So for that reason, I like talking about African republics because, number one, republics, as I've said, is a superior form of government. And I believe that when the colonizers came to Africa, they decided, or maybe they just found it difficult to talk about African republics because it will go contrary to their maybe assumed position of Africans and that they were inferior to them. And there was no way they were going to have a republic, while in Europe, the monarchs were all over the place. Europe was under monarchies. But then you realize that even though Europeans were mostly ruled by monarchs, they celebrated republics. And that's why the Roman Republic is so much celebrated. They understood that republics were a superior form of government. It's just that they could not find a way to implement it in Europe. And so when they come to Africa, they find these republics and they decide they are not going to talk about them. Very few of people who recorded African history, especially among the Europeans, you'll find them mentioning these republics. Now, the Nandi Republic is one of the most robust republics, or was one of the most robustly organized republics. And it had everything basically taken care of. There was no monarch among the Nandi, of course. Most people know of the Oroyot, but that's the match most people go into trying to understand the government structure of the Nandi. The Republic of the Nandi was known as Chemwal, but by the Nandi themselves. Of course, that's a word that the rest of people don't use, but the Nandis used to call their republic Chemwal. Now, Chemwal was subdivided into what used to be called as emet. And emet was, we can say, something like a county. And each emet had its own council of elders. And there were 6 emets in the Nandi Republic. And they include Soin, which is also called Belkut. There was Aldai, there was Mosop, there was Wareng, there was Emgwen, and there was Jesume. These were the 6 emets, or as they themselves called them, Emet Nwek. These were the 6 counties of the Nandi Republic. And now each county or each emet was composed of several Pororiosiek or Pororiet. Now, Pororiet, of course, that means was a smaller unit within the emet. And the emet had several Pororiosiek that formed the emet. Now, the Soin emet had Kamelilo, Kapchepkendi, and Tugen. This formed the Soin emet. And then there was the Aldai emet, and it had Kapianga, it had Kapsile, it had Kakipoch, part of it, not the entire of Kakipoch. And then there was Mosop. Mosop had Koileke, it has Chepkendi, part of it, and Kapkipilian. Now there was Wareng. Wareng had Kaptumois, part of it, Kakipoch, part of it. There was Emgwen. Emgwen had Kaptumois, part of it, and Kapsiondoi. And then there was Jesumo, which had Tipiagot, and Cheptol, and Kibgoror, and Kapkimno, and Mur Aptuk. So these were the Pororiosiek within the emet. And as I've explained, we can think of the emet as a county, and then within the county we have sub-counties, which were now the Pororiet. And below the Pororiet, we had what used to be called Koret. And Koret was mostly like, we can say each clan had its own Koret. So each Koret was basically a clan, and several Korets formed Pororiet. And then under Koret, there was what used to be called Siritiet, which we can say maybe is a smaller unit within the Koret. And then under the Siritiet, we had what used to be called the Kokwet. Now, Kokwet was basically a village, a neighborhood, a small neighborhood several homesteads form a Kokwet, and then several Kokwets form Siritiet, and several Siritiets form Koret, and several Korets form Pororiet, and several Pororiets form Emet, and 6 Emets or Emotinwek form the Chemwal Republic, the Nandi Republic. The Kokwet, as I've said, the local small neighborhood, would have what used to be called a Boyot Ap Kokwet, which was an elder within the neighborhood who was like in charge. And if people had issues, they will go to the Boyot Ap Kokwet to have issues resolved. And now within the Siritiet, which is the next unit, you will have several Boisieg Ap Kokwet, or several of these elderly or wise men from each local neighborhood forming a council, and these people will now, of course, resolve more serious matters that will emerge within the community. They had someone who served as their speaker, we can say maybe as a speaker of the Council of Elders, and it's a person who used to go by the title Olaitoriat. Now, the Olaitoriat used to be in charge of the conversations that went on in the Siritiet. Now, then the Koret also had a Council of Elders, which is now the bigger unit, several Siritiets form the Korets, and the Koret had someone who was also like a speaker, and his title was Kiptayat, and he oversaw conversations of the elders that went on in the Koret. And he also had another job. He was like a commander in the army of the Republic. So people from this Koret would, or the military or the soldiers from this Koret will fall under the leadership of the Kiptayat. And of course, then you will have several Kiptayats coming from different Korets. And several Korets, of course, will form Pororiet. And at the Pororiet level, you will have Boyot Oret, which was the elder who represented a Koret, coming to the bigger council of the Pororiet, where matters of the entire Pororiet will be discussed and resolved if there were conflicts, of course. Now, at the Pororiet level, there was another office, and this was the office of the Maotiot. Now, Maotiot was the representative of the high priest of the Republic, that is the Oroyot. Now, the Oroyot had Maotiot representing them at the Pororiet level, and this is the person who will bring the messages of the Oroyot to the Pororiet level and to the Council of Elders at the Pororiet level. And he was basically a spiritual leader at that level, of course, representing the Oroyot. And then, of course, as I've said, several Pororiets will form Emet, and this also will have its own Council of Elders, actually. But seems like the Emet Council of Elders didn't have much, we can say, significance. It looks like there was more focus on the Pororiet Council of Elders and then the smaller units within the Pororiet. But then you move up above, now you have the Chemwal, the Republic itself. And at this level, of course, you have now the old council members who represent each of the Emet and Pororiet. And as I've said, it seems like there was more focus on the Pororiet, so that you will have elders representing Pororiets forming this larger council of the Republic. And at this level, of course, the Oroyot was the high priest. He wasn't like the executive, as many people think, or how it's often portrayed. He was a high priest, but he had also another role in this function. But before I talk about that, the Oroyot was, of course, could give vision to the Republic, foresee things that are likely to happen in future, and then advise the Republic accordingly on how to prepare for such eventualities. And he also performed the function of making the decisions about arranging the age sets. It is the Oroyot who decided when the next initiations were going to happen and for how long, and then decides to close that process for some time. And it was upon the Oroyot to decide again when that is going to happen. That was a very important function of the Oroyot, because it informed how society was organized, actually. It informed how long soldiers served, because often they needed to serve until there was a next initiation, so that there are new soldiers joining the ranks. And also the Oroyot was basically the commander-in-chief. There was no any other executive authority within the Republic to oversee the army. So it was the Oroyot who will give commands to the army, to the soldiers, on what needs to be done, on when to attack, when not to attack. Of course, the Oroyot used to basically have the Council of Elders approve some of these things. So it was, yes, it serves as the commander-in-chief, but decisions have to be taken through the Council of Elders. Now, as far as the military, the Nandi, of course, are known to have been very fierce fighters. they had a military, and the military was formed around age sets. So when there was a new initiation, the people who came from that will automatically become soldiers, and they will serve until the next bunch or the next group is initiated. But they could also be retired for other reasons. For example, if they lost a battle or a war with a neighboring republic or monarch, then they were retired. It did not matter how young they were going to be retired. Or if there were serious indiscipline issues within the ranks, then they would be retired by the Council of Elders and the Oroyot, of course. And then within the military, of course, I think I've mentioned this, there was this person called Kiptayat. And this person was like the speaker of the Koret, the clan. But they also served as, you can say, a commander. It was part of the rank of the military. So that was the organization of the Nandi Republic. It was so elaborately organized and structured, and it's very unfortunate that we don't talk a lot more about African republics. And I always say republic is a superior form of government compared to monarchs, because republics are they have protocol that is very stringent, that is very strict, and the power is distributed to many parts. So that is what the Nandi Republic was. Those are my random thoughts.